Hey guys, my name is Shelby Graham. I'm a graduate student and I will be talking to you guys about Ariel by Sylvia Plath. It is a book of poems that she wrote. I found it very interesting and I'm excited to talk to you all about it. So to start off with just some general background information, most of these poems were written within the last few months of her life. I read that they were written in like a frenzy, in a period of intense creativity, and you can really see that in the poems. You can see how that you see her creativity and her unique perspectives and everything really shine through in these poems. It was first published after she passed away in 1965 in the UK and then in 1966 in the US. And then the restored edition was republished in 2004 by Frida Hughes, Sylvia Plath's daughter. So the first editions that were published, her husband Ted Hughes, he took out some of the poems, he rearranged the layout, the arrangement. There's a lot of debated reasons as to why he did that. Some people think that maybe he was trying to protect his reputation. I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but Frida Hughes, I think she kind of defends her father a little bit and says that he was doing it to protect her. But anyways, in 2004, she decided to republish it in the way that her mother intended it to be. Okay, so Ariel, a lot of the themes and topics such as mental illness, suicide, motherhood, complex relationships, conflicted feelings about motherhood and domestic life, all of those things that we see in Plath's other poems and works are also shown in these poems in Ariel, but we kind of see a little bit of a different, it's a little bit more surreal than confessional. It's still kind of both, but she kind of, I think going back to this, like, how I said in the past slide about this was when she wrote all of these, it was kind of in a frenzy. And I think you kind of see that in the way that it has a little bit more of, I don't want to say more creative, because it's not more creative, but just a little bit a shift in tone, I guess. I really liked that a lot of the poems they really talk about just kind of ordinary day-to-day experiences, nothing super out of the ordinary. Things, like I said, things about motherhood, being pregnant. One of them, I'll go to the next slide, some examples. One of them, Cut, is about her chopping an onion and she cut her finger, and she talks about how that made her feel. Ariel, Daddy, and Lazarus, or Lady Lazarus, we talked about those earlier this semester. A few more that I put on here were Morning Song, Tulips, Nick and the Candlestick, The Moon and the Yew Tree, and of course there's a lot of other poems in there, but these are just a few that stood out to me. And you really see she writes about these ordinary things, but to her, she finds deeper, richer meanings in these things, if that makes sense. You see different imagery, and it's very interesting, and I really liked that. So another thing that I did while studying Ariel, I looked at the different forewords that were written. The first edition, Robert Lowell, who's another confessional poet, wrote the foreword, and then in 2004, her daughter Frida Hughes wrote another one, and so I felt like there was a lot that we can take away from the different forewords, because, I don't know, I just found it interesting. It kind of shows how Sylvia Plath how it's changed over the years, how people read and interpret her. And so I'll just start with Robert Lowell. And so like I said, he was also an American confessional poet. He actually knew Plath and worked with her. She sat in on some class that he taught, a lecture or something like that, and then I just pointed out a few quotes from his foreword. He said, "Language never dies in her mouth." He called the poems "Controlled Hallucination," "The Autobiography of a Fever," "Super real," "Hypnotic," "Great classical heroines," and then he also ends it with the fact that people who read the poems, they will be shocked and recoil. So he shows this unique relationship between being a confessional poet who is writing about personal experiences, personal feelings, but then also from a surreal perspective where I don't think I put it on this slide, but I think he says something like the poems are uninterested in realism. So he talks about like how is it confessional, but it's also surreal. So I'll get a little more into that in a little bit. Now let's look at what Frida Hughes said in her 2004 edition. So I guess I'll start with the quotes. "Since she died, my mother has been dissected, analyzed, reinterpreted, reinvented, fictionalized, and in some cases completely fabricated. It comes down to this. Her own words describe her best. Her ever-changing moods defining the way she viewed her world and the manner in which she pinned down her subjects with a merciless eye." And then talking about the poems, she says, talking about the work as a whole, not just the poems, she used every emotional experience as if it were a scrap of material that could be pieced together to make a wonderful dress. So I like what Frida Hughes did in this foreword, and I really liked that she decided to republish this restored edition. Going back to the first quote, I think Frida recognized that, like it says, everybody from her work tried to figure out who Plath is. And she realized that with this original layout of Ariel that Sylvia Plath had, by changing that, it changed the tone of Ariel. It changed the message. It went from, originally I think Plath, according to Frida Hughes, it was supposed to be a little bit more hopeful. She says that the first poem, it started with the word love, the last poem ended with spring, and so it left with this suggestion of hope. When her father, Ted Hughes, changed the arrangement and took things out, it almost it made it more like diary entries of her just, I don't want to say just, but her just kind of writing down her feelings and emotions, whereas Frida recognizes that Ariel as a whole, it was a crafted and everything was placed in a specific order for a specific reason. And I really liked the quote that she used every emotional experience as if it were a scrap of material put together into a beautiful dress. And so she's saying that they weren't just like poems that she wrote down, threw it in a book, and then here it is. She really put a lot of thought and effort into taking all of these experiences that she had, all of these emotions, and she put it together in a very planned, thought out, it's a work of art. It's not just her journal entries. And I don't want to say just, but is very, very, let me see kind of what I wrote. Put together in a specific way. And she feels that when her father changed that arrangement, it took that away from it. But also I thought it was interesting. She does defend her father, even though she's saying that it kind of, the original published edition kind of damaged her message in a way. She still defends her father, and she says that her father was doing it to protect her. So it's still debated as to why he did that, but I just found that interesting. So I know we're all probably already familiar with the definition of confessional and surreal, but I wanted to kind of put them up next to each other, a visual, just so we can get an idea. So confessional, it is known for being intensely personal experiences, taboo subjects about mental health, sexuality, and trauma. You see a lot of the author's inner world and struggles. The emotions are very authentic, and then usually it's fairly autobiographical. And then surreal, I like to think of surreal also, in my mind, I think of like surreal paintings and drawings, but from a literary perspective, so a lot of dreamlike imagery, subconscious exploration, and kind of fragmented. And so Ariel has kind of a mix of these two things. So I found this article that addresses this unique relationship, kind of almost conflicting relationship between confessionalism and surrealism. And this was a quote from the article. This article then attempts to understand what it means to call Ariel, with all its surreal imagery and frequently abstract descriptions and settings, confessional, and in what ways that term and the poems themselves invite and resist a search for Plath herself within the work. So, how is it autobiography and confessional while also being uninterested in realism? So, the author of this article basically says that Ariel is reader-centered. It's confessional in tone, and it's not necessarily confessional in actual facts. We don't get concrete facts and evidence about her life, but we're more so getting confessions of her emotions. The author talks about, back to being reader-centered, how it's more so about the reader connecting to the emotions that Plath writes and the feelings, the expressions, and not necessarily the actual experiences, if that makes sense. So like I think about how not every reader has necessarily attempted suicide or had suicidal thoughts, but a reader can still connect with and understand and through their own experiences connect to the emotions and the feelings that Plath writes, if that makes sense. Comparing, so Robert Lowell, who's a confessional poet, he wrote Life Studies, which is very autobiographical, and so kind of comparing the two, where Plath takes a little bit more of like artistic, I can't think of the word, freedom, I guess, freedom, expression, all of that. Fever 103 is one that I believe Robert Lowell brings up, that he brings up this juxtaposition between kind of the surreal hallucinations. And then here's two more quotes from the article that I read. They will discover what some might call confessions, strong waves of tone and feeling that range from anguish and rage to maternal love and a reveling in the world's restorative properties. But whether these feelings actually comment on Plath's inner life directly is, as with any poem, difficult to establish definitively on the basis of text alone. And then the other quote, the question becomes not whether confessional poetry is autobiography, but what it is about the poems that allow and even encourage some readers to take them as such. So I thought these were interesting as well, and kind of back to the argument that the poems are reader-centered and it's more about what the reader gets out of the poems. So I hope that made sense and it wasn't too repetitive, but I hope you get a chance to read Ariel, at least some of the poems from them, because I think they're very beautiful. I really love Tulips and Morning Song, and I don't know, I just really liked it. So I hope y'all enjoy reading it, and y'all have a great day.